Old Grognard says, let's look at how half-elves work in 2nd edition AD&D's Dark Sun setting. Welcome back to Old Grognard says. In this video, I'm going to go in the same order that I did when I covered the Elves of Dark Sun back in episode 65. That is, I'm going to start off with some lore to establish context, then move on to the role-playing section, and then end the video with game mechanics like racial abilities and multi-class combinations. Let's get started by looking at how half-elves fit into the setting. This is from page 7 of the Dark Sun Rules book. Elves and humans travel many of the same roads on Athas. Elven tribes have at times encountered human mercenaries, just as elven warriors have found gainful employment in the armies of the city-states. The merchant class, too, is overrun with traders of both races, so it is not at all unusual for children of mixed parentage to be born into the world, the half-elves. I'm not going to read the rest of the text in this section, because basically it says half-elves are rarely accepted by humans or elves, and as a result tend to be self-reliant. Because of this, a lot of them are loners and hermits and rarely have a place to call home. They also might end up living with races other than humans or elves because those groups usually don't have the extreme bias the elves and humans have. Anyways, with that in mind, I want to explain some things about my personal take on the half-elves of this setting. Like I said earlier, a lot of the text in this section basically says over and over that the world is intolerant of the half-elf and that they're all loners and have nowhere to call home. I prefer an alternate but related take that most, let's say 4 out of 5 half-elves, are born into the segment of Athasian society that handles trade and the logistics that go with it. In this layer of society, we have the merchants who sell goods inside the city-states, the traders that sell them those goods, the caravans that move things between city-states, and all of the people that make this system work. They might be the animal handlers, teamsters, caravan guards, the folks that feed everyone in the caravan. You get the idea. So within the caravan trader world, the half-elf is pretty common and just an accepted part of that world. But outside of that life, how the rest of the world treats them is pretty much in line with what the text says. Let's move on to the section on role-playing. Most of what the book says about role-playing is based on the thing about self-reliance and not being accepted by elves or humans. I'm going to read it and then give my spin on what it says based on what I said earlier about the caravan folk. Half-elves pride themselves on their self-reliance. A player with a half-elf character should keep this in mind and apply it whenever possible. For example, when a half-elf is part of a larger party of characters, he will rarely eat of the meal prepared by the others, nor will he use the fire set for the camp. He will instead hunt for his own food, cook and eat it by himself, away from the others. A half-elf character will discuss strategy with his companions when he has them, and will cooperate as necessary, but will always seem semi-detached and aloof. Despite their self-reliance, when faced with elves or humans, half-elves will often find themselves looking for acceptance. For instance, when among elves, a half-elf will go out of his way to prove just how elven he is, by running great distances with them and observing other social and cultural rituals with the elves. These efforts, however, are mostly lost on the elves and therefore serve no purpose. The half-elf's behavior is seen by some as slightly irrational, but only by those who are comfortably wrapped in the blankets of racial acceptance. Having none leaves the half-elves out in the bitterest cold. So I guess I'll call them caravan half-elves, will do a lot of the things they talk about above, but for slightly different reasons. They'll do the thing where they cook their own food and such, but they mostly do this when they're new to a group and don't know what their role is. They sit back and observe and try to figure out what to do in the context of the group. Indeed, a caravan half elf might find out that they're a better hunter or cook than everyone else in the group and take on that role just so that they have a starting point to figure out their place in the group's social order. Anyways, that's just my spin on the role playing section, so you can have some different options for figuring out how to play a half elf character. Before I continue, I want to throw out a disclaimer. In no way am I trying to downplay the negative experiences multiracial people had in the past, present, and most likely will continue to have in the future. If I do come across that way, that's not my intent. Rather, my intent is to take a common experience most people can relate to, that is, being an outsider and not knowing where you fit in, and apply it to the role playing strategy for playing a half elven character. With that out of the way, let's move on to the physical characteristics and game engine part of playing a half elf character in Dark Sun. On page 7 of the rules book, we're told a half elf is generally tall, between 6 and 6.5 feet tall, but more meaty than his elven counterparts. His facial features are clearly more deeply defined than those of a human, but based solely on his continence, a half-elf can usually pass for either elf or human. If we look at page 18 of the rules book, there's the tables for height, weight, and age for all of the different player character races. The base height for half-elves is 70 inches for male characters and 68 for female characters, with a modifier of 2d6. This makes it where a male half-elf will be between 6 feet and 6 feet 10 inches tall, and female characters will be between 5 foot 10 and 6 foot 8. The base weight for a male character is 120 pounds, and the base weight for a female character is 95 pounds, with a modifier of 3d12. This puts the weight range for a male character at 123 to 156 pounds, and the range for a female character at 98 to 131 pounds. Further down the page is the starting age and the modifier, which is 15 years plus a modifier of 2d4. Max age is 90 plus 2d20, which is only 10 more than what humans have. Now let's look at the allowed classes, multi-class combinations, and level limits. As you can see here, a half-elf can be any character class, and they have fairly generous level limits, especially when you compare it with demi-humans in, quote, regular D&D. If we look at the multi-class combinations available at first glance, it looks the same as what elves have available to them. However, if you read the footnotes, they can substitute Bard for any thief entry and can also substitute Druid for any cleric entry, neither of which is available to elven characters. Here we have the minimum and maximum ability scores for half-elves, and then over here we have the ability score modifiers. When the book tells us the ability score modifiers, in both cases the reasoning can be summed up as because elves. Half-elves don't have any special resistance to sleep and charm in this setting, and they also don't have any special ability to detect secret doors. Elves don't get these things either, so that makes sense. They do, however, get the same 60-foot infravision that elves have. Half-elves also get a couple of other benefits as they go up in levels. At third level, they get a free slot in the survival non-weapon proficiency. Just like anyone else that has a survival proficiency, they have to specify a terrain type. The terrain types listed for Dark Sun are stony barrens, sandy wastes, rocky badlands, mountains, scrub plains, forest, salt flats, or boulder fields. If you have any questions about this, just look up how the survival proficiency works in the PHB. The other benefit is gained at 5th level, and the text for it reads like this. A half-elf can befriend one pet when he reaches 5th level. The pet may be any local animal no larger than man-sized. The half-elf must spend 1 week with the animal while it is still young. After that time, the pet will follow the half-elf everywhere and obey simple commands. A half-elf can only have one such pet at a time, and must wait 100 days after the death of one pet to begin training another. Choice of pets is always subject to the DM's approval. Refer to Chapter 11, Encounters, for possible pet choices. I like how they wrote this with emphasis on how the DM has final say on what pets you can and can't have. A good rule of thumb is that the more awesome a player's pet is, the more stuff they should have to do in order to get that pet. So, if they want to have a pet rat, it shouldn't be all that difficult. On the other hand, if they want a mountain lion, that should take some doing. I always thought that Dark Sun was at least in some small part inspired by Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom. This piece was done by J. Allen St. John in 1920 and was the front piece for Thuvia, Made of Mars, published the same year. Anyways, that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and have yourself a wonderful rest of your day.